most important weapon is the stabby bubble tea straw. Hi, and welcome back to this channel. I'm Claire, and yes, I like swords, but I also like cats. So it's pretty much a given that my favourite character in all of the Shrek franchise films has always been Puss in Boots. I mean, that's just a perfect Venn diagram circle of my interests in the shape of a sword-wielding cat. And sure, the first film in the Puss in Boots spin-off was good but not excellent, but the sequel, Puss in Boots: Last Wish, is exceptional. But you know what's just as good, if not better, than compelling storytelling, character arcs and animation? Swords. Especially when these swords are actually enhanced by all of these things and serve to tell a better story, tell better character arcs, and look incredibly good in doing so. So today I just want to sit down and rank these different weapons that we see in The Last Wish. And spoiler alert, there will be spoilers. Proceed at your own risk. Play this video if you dare. Oh, am I going to make a terrible mess? Probably, since this is on camera. Predictably, I made a mess. This bubble tea is as large as my head. So first off, let's look at the iconic sword of Puss in Boots himself. This is a rapier, specifically designed for more complex cut and thrust techniques as opposed to, say, the blunt force of a longsword. So like most rapiers, I try and smoothly bring my props out, and then it always fails, but somehow this time it hasn't, so congrats to me, I guess. So most rapiers have a long, relatively thin blade and a complex hilt that is meant to protect your hand and also look pretty. In the case of Puss in Boots rapier, this is a cup-hilted rapier. It has this kind of cup shape to it as opposed to what I have here, which is a swept hilt blade, and it has this kind of little scalloped edge along the side, as well as a cat head shaped pommel, which is extremely cute. Oh no, not the camera, not the camera. We made it. I'm very, very proud of both of us. This setup makes it look like a sword is my co-host, which, to be fair, is probably accurate. And rapiers were not really specific to any one country, but in some European countries like Germany, rapier could also be a term referring to an imported weapon coming from France, Italy, or Spain, which, as we know, was in the Shrek cinematic universe, is where our Puss in Boots is implied to come from the fabled fancy land of Spain. Many Spanish fencing masters are associated with treatises on the rapier, in addition to Italian masters. Another term for the rapier is the Spanish espada ropera, and a key sword fighting technique called a verdadera destreza came to associate rapier fencing directly with the term destreza, or dexterity, and verdadera destreza translated as the true skill, or the true art, of sword fighting. Or if you are a historical European martial arts student like myself, a massive pain in the arm. Verdadera is great and it looks beautiful, but sometimes my fencing arm appreciates a style of fencing that is a little bit more vulgar. So there's already a Spanish connection to the rapier there. But even better than that, the cup-hilted design is often called the Spanish manner and could have originated from a Spanish sword-making design, and it is accurate that rapiers would have been prettified with a range of engravings, chiselling and adornments. Adornments that could have been similar to the specific scalloped edge that we see with Puss's sword. There could also be variations in pommel shapes and sizes, though none, admittedly, with a cute cat head shape as far as I'm aware. Lo siento. But the rapier's choice here is also a reference to classic swashbuckler cinematography. Puss in Boots is indeed drawn directly from the fairy tale story, where his boots would have been a sign of wealth and power, just like an expensive looking and elegant rapier. But beyond the fairy tale alone, the Shrek version of Puss in Boots draws a lot of inspiration from swashbuckler heroes like Zorro. The rapier holds this association to not only skill and speed, but also wit and a certain roguish charm. So next, let's have a look at daggers, specifically those of Kitty Softpaws. I really like Kitty Softpaws as a secondary character. She reflects a lot of the classic tropes of the badass woman who's a foil to the main character, and also, you know, they fall in love. But she's never fallen in the trap for me of being this absolutely flawless, indestructible badass action girl. She feels like a kind of lived-in, well-rounded character. She is a very, very talented thief, but tragically was declawed in the past by her owners, which makes the bladed weapons she carries all the more important. Which includes for her what resembles most closely a stiletto dagger, which can somehow be extended long enough to function as a short sword, which is not possible and not a thing historically, but I just personally love as a weapon design. But daggers with these types of mechanisms associated to their blades are a thing, like trident daggers, where you think you just like have this one blade on your dagger, it's all good, and then this mechanism is released and schnicked. Trying to do the Wolverine sound, and like, surprise! You suddenly have 3 blades kind of extending in this kind of trident pattern as a great way to trap your opponent's blade. Very sneaky and very effective. Stiletto daggers have traditionally been associated since their emergence in Renaissance Europe with assassins and kind of sneakier, stealthier fighting practices, which fits perfectly with Kitty Softpaws. An extra detail that I do like is that she has little heels on her boots, and as we know, the stiletto dagger then lent its terminology to referring to the stiletto high heels. Although Kitty Softpaws' heels are much smaller. You might even call them kitten heels. And if you're interested in finding out more about the stiletto and this vocabulary evolution from stilettos as daggers to stilettos as high heels, you can check that out in my video on the subject. When it comes to the gatito blade, its blade is a lot shorter and thicker, and it is overall a lot smaller, with some quillins to protect the hands and a cute cat-shaped pommel. Quillins is basically these guys, the handlebar moustache of the sword. So it's a small blade, but also a mighty blade, and quite a strong one, as we find out when, spoiler alert, deprived of his sword, Puss uses it to fend off the attack of the final boss villain, and ultimately faces him off head-on with not only his original rapier, but also the dagger that Kitty gifted him, which is not just a dagger, but also a metaphor of trust and love, and not going at it solo in life, but being vulnerable enough to open yourself up to having a support network and having a life that is worth living because you are forming meaningful connections with others. Yes, that all derived from a Shrek spin-off sequel. And we love some metaphorical, story-relevant sword fighting. But back to dagger design. Daggers with this distinctive shape would have emerged relatively early on in dagger history, as a kind of direct evolution from knightly daggers in the 13th century. Contrarily to the stiletto, which was later designed to be optimal for thrusting, these dagger types could also retain a cutting-edge design, which we can only assume is the case here with the gatito blade, as Kitty uses it in the film to give Puss a close shave. These blades were sometimes designed as miniature versions of swords themselves, such as the rondel dagger, the quillin dagger, or the ballock dagger. But never mind the ballocks. The most important thing at this stage is that the dagger was primarily considered as the secondary weapon to a sword, used to parry and provide other creative ways of securing your victory. So there's really this sense inherently in this final scene with the paired weapon combo that not only is this humble little dagger ultimately what saves the day and saves Puss's life, but is also a perfect complement to the sword, just as Kitty and Puss perfectly complement one another. Romantic swords storytelling.
Love is a dagger.
So now we're going to talk about the villains. Yeah, villains plural. One of my favourite things about this film is that it kind of satisfied everybody's yearning for that return of the classic animated villain, and true to DreamWorks tradition, gave us a great one, but also just basically gave us 3 different villain archetypes. The redeemable villain, the completely redeemable villain, and the inevitable villain, I guess. Somebody who's not really necessarily a villain once you find out who they are, but is just this kind of unstoppable force that just cannot be defeated. So we'll get into that. So for now, let's talk about the redeemable villain and her weapon. So we've got Goldilocks and the 3 Bears, the 3 Bear crime family, as the kind of mini boss antagonists and kind of B plot of the film, with this kind of reimagining of the classic fairy tale, with Goldilocks being an orphan girl who is taken in by the 3 Bears after she breaks into their home, and they just become this kind of found family who also just does crime, and I love them. I love that the mum bear is played by Olivia Colman, and that they're just all super British for just no discernible reason. And Goldilocks has this amazing design to her, but she also has this incredible wooden staff with 2 points, which immediately made me think about bidons, which are weapons with 2 prongs and kind of look like pitchforks. And these bidons could be used for a range of purposes, a bit of a multi-purpose tool, from fishing to agriculture. And it has also been represented as a hunting element, which I think fits in really nicely with Goldie's purpose and her personality. She's seen as a very proactive, a very, very ruthless character who is absolutely ready to stop at nothing to get her hands on the fallen star to make a wish, and that wish, it turns out, is to find her own human family. It also visually represents who she is and what her role is within the crime family. She tells her adoptive little brother, little bear brother, that you smash and I grab. So kind of literally she grabs with her bidons, and that is then a reference later on in the film where she actively lets go of her one opportunity to make her wish and instead saves her little brother with the bidons, and refers to the fact that he smashes and she grabs, and kind of grabs him back from almost certain death, because this movie just doesn't pull its punches in terms of actual characters being able to just expire. So again, it's story driven, it's character driven in a bit more of a subtle way, but one that is still very much present. And also, I hadn't realised this, but the 2 prongs also echo the 2 buns, and bear, kind of imitating bear ears very, very nicely. So that's an extra little thing. And now we're on to our irredeemable villain, Big Jack Horner. I absolutely love the completely over-the-top energy of Big Jack Horner, and the fact that he is just blatantly evil. He's a monster. And it is very refreshing in an era of other animation studios like Disney only making villains that end up being good at the end. And here, there's just this joy in the fact that DreamWorks seem to be almost parodying Disney, making fun of Disney by just having a character who's just blatantly a monster, and not even a Jiminy Cricket knockoff can convince him otherwise.
You're not gonna shoot a puppy, are you, Jack?
Yeah, in the face. Why?
So Jack Horner is basically seeking out the star because he wants all the magic in the world for himself, and he's also hoarded quite a lot of magic, which includes all these amazing artifacts from different fairy tales and legends, including Excalibur, but the sword is still in its original stone because he couldn't pull it out, obviously, so he just uses it as this 2-in-1 weapon, or poison apples as grenades. Like, there's lots of really, really fun, creative, visual stuff going on. But one of the most used weapons is a crossbow that he arms with unicorn horns that he shoots at people. And their effect, which he finds out and then continues to use, is that they make their target explode with confetti. Now, historically, the unicorn horn does actually have some associations with arms and armour, but it's mostly decorative and symbolic due to its high value. In fact, the last thing that you'd want to do if you had been scammed into buying a narwhal horn, which you for all intents and purposes believed was a unicorn horn was just shoot it at someone and waste it because it was extremely valuable. People believed that these horns had incredible healing properties against disease and poison, and they could also hold incredible symbolic power, which is why the sword of Charles the Bold has a hilt carved from a unicorn horn. And I've actually done a whole video about that unicorn sword, which you can check out after this one. And keeping the best for last, an incredible animated villain and his sickles. I think it's pretty fair to say that this is the most badass bladed weapon we've seen an animated villain from a major American film studio wield in a fair number of years. And if this prompts you to run to your keyboard and prove me wrong, challenge accepted. Win-win for me, I get to rank animated villain swords in the future. So our villainous wolf, which I've seen some people refer to as Lobo before his true name and nature is revealed, is immediately established as a massive threat from the beginning of the movie, when he immediately disproves the arrogant claim from Puss that no blade has ever landed on him. I mean, we see blood trickle down the main hero's face when he faces this guy in their first fight and just immediately loses, is destroyed, has to run away and is frightened. And that's when we see the first appearance of these fantastic looking and terrifying looking dual-wielded sickles. Later on, and just a warning that we are entering into major spoiler territory, it is revealed that one of them is engraved with a little symbol for each of Puss's 9 lives being crossed out. Because this guy, this wolf, is literally death. As he says, not a metaphor, not a symbol, just death. Straight up. DreamWorks just put the Grim Reaper in a sequel to the spin-off of a Shrek franchise, which hands down, that's incredible. And when he confronts Puss in a last boss final scene, his sickles actually combine and extend into a double-ended glaive weapon. What? That's amazing. I mean, that's terrifying, but that's amazing. And that's just some beautiful weapon design. Chef's kiss. So I thankfully went into Puss in Boots' Last Wish, spoiler free, and twist that this badass, legit scary wolf was actually death, straight up. It was a real surprise, and yet made total sense when you look at not only his demeanour, but his weaponry, reflecting the imagery of the Grim Reaper, from the red eyes to the black cape. I appreciate that they didn't just straight up give him a scythe, because I think that would have immediately given the game away, wouldn't have been subtle enough, instead privileging the cousin of the scythe, the sickle, which actually could also be a weapon used by the Grim Reaper, and is sometimes represented in different Grim Reaper imagery, and is a callback to the same idea, that of literally harvesting a life, with an everyday agricultural weapon that would have been a part of everyday life, and so all the more terrifying for people living with this constant fear of death at the time, the idea that death is indeed everywhere. And the use of sickles as weaponry and sickle fighting was actually a thing, and we do have evidence of it in treatises such as Paulus Hector Mares, even though it's not certain to what extent this sickle fighting demonstration was a serious attempt at treating sickles as a viable weapon, or a tongue-in-cheek commentary on the types of weapons that would have been used by peasants years before the treatise was published in a failed peasant uprising. And in fact, there is a historical precedent to sickle blades being attached onto longer pole handles to become these kind of pole weapons and being used in the context of fighting in revolts, but also military contexts. And if you want to find out more about that, I actually made a whole video about scythes used as weaponry and their association to the Grim Reaper. The fact that these sickles are represented as this really powerful, flexible weapon makes it all the more powerful when Puss is able to parry them, and makes it all the more compelling and interesting when Death actually retreats from fighting Puss and gives him the chance to live to see another day and kind of live his last life to the fullest. And there's this beautiful parallel between the moment where Death is defying Puss to pick up his sword at the beginning of the film when he is defeating him, and when Puss has effectively defied death and is challenging him to pick up his sickles. So just some beautiful kind of poetic parallel, which kind of reflects the whole point I've been talking about throughout this video of these weapons being compelling because they are so directly intertwined into the story that The Last Wish is trying to tell. And I think that's a really good hallmark of how to use weapon design in a really, really effective, powerful and emotional way. At the end of the day, what we're looking at in terms of weapon design is not statistics like efficiency and, you know, how brutal and lethal these weapons really would have been. In the context of using these in a fantasy context, we want to see the way in which they help a character achieve their ends, whether that is a hero, a villain, a redeemable villain, a evil villain, or just the ever-present and ever-inescapable presence of death himself, I guess. And for that, I think Puss in Boots just knocks it out of the park. So it's time for the final rank. Oops. Well, my camera, pretty much corresponding to the eternal theme of death throughout Puss in Boots, gave up, and I could not find my charger. I can't find my charger anywhere. So yes, I think my final ranking is Jack Horner's unicorn horns at the very, very bottom. They're fun, goofy weapons, but don't necessarily hold that much emotional weight, and, you know, aren't necessarily the most original thing in the world, although they were just very, very fun. I think number 5 would be Goldie's staff, which again is just such a great, effective weapon, but I just would have liked to see it developed a little bit more. The 4th, I'm going to put the stiletto, because it doesn't necessarily feature as much in the rest of the movie. I mean, it has a fun extendy thing, but I feel as though the full impact of that is rather more felt in the first film rather than the Last Wish sequel. But it is all the same, a very cool weapon. Thirdly, well, number 3, right? Yes, I'm going to put Puss's blade, because it is just a very, very cute design. It's got a little scallop edge, it's got its little cat head pommel, it's got all these little nicks and scratches that make it this kind of special, beloved sword, but it's just a bit lower down because we don't really get to see it for lots of the movie. And then secondly, we're going to go with the Gatito blade, just because of everything we've talked about, of it being such a impactful weapon, but in terms of storytelling, in terms of emotional weight, and just because we can always appreciate a good, significant rapier dagger combo in an animated movie Shrek spin-off sequel. And finally, I mean, this is not really much of a surprise, but the sickles. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a pair of sickles that can then combine into a double trouble glaive weapon ever in any animated franchise. So I've really, really got to commend The Last Wish for that. So I think that brings us to the end of the video, and I hope you've enjoyed this slight romp throughout history with The Last Wish and its wonderful weaponry. Thank you very much for watching and for bearing with me during the technical difficulties at the end. If you like this video, please do give it a like, give it a share, subscribe. Please do let me know down in the comments if you have a favourite weapon amongst all these, what your ranking is, and indeed if you have any badass animated villain weapons that you want to shout out. I would actually quite like to make a companion piece to my giving Disney princesses sword video and give Disney villains swords, and then we can also rant about the fact that there are no true evil, irredeemable Disney villains anymore. So let me know if you would like a little bit of that. Stay safe, sword lovers and sickle lovers, and see you in another video.